Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have been the original changemakers and stewards of Australia for over 60,000 years. Their profound wisdom, resilience, and deep connection to country have fostered countless stories of survival, adaptation, and transformation. The knowledge held by these communities is an invaluable resource for understanding how to create positive change and build a more just and sustainable world.
Welcome back to Changemaker Q&A, everyone. This is our first podcast in a little while. Oh my goodness. I am so excited for the year ahead. I have just almost finished my PhD. I'm not quite finished, but I've more or less done all the research, submitted the thesis. So now it's just all of those formalities in terms of getting my thesis examined, making any changes that I need to, doing my oral defense of my thesis and all that stuff before it's finalized. But I'm also at a weird point in my life where I have left my second job that I was doing on the side of my research, and now I'm no longer researching full-time. And I'm in this transitionary period where I'm transitioning into focusing on the work that we do at the Humanitarian Changemakers Network full-time. And it's both exciting for me and scary. It's exciting because I started HCN way back in 2020. It was around COVID times when it had evolved from the workshops I was running and just all of these kind of things I was doing to support changemakers in mostly my local community. And I was faced with this decision. Do I go all in on this thing, this idea that I have, or should I opt for something a little bit more secure, considering we were in a very unpredictable time? This was in 2020, and I opted for the more predictable route, and that's why I ended up doing my PhD, and I definitely don't regret it. I've learnt so much, and I feel like the researching skills I've developed and the frameworks and research I actually developed in my PhD is going to enhance the work that I do at HCN so much. But it's this weird full circle thing where now that I've finished the PhD, I'm going back and basically doing the thing that I set out and wanted to start before I did the PhD. But I thought we would kick off this year with a bit of a kind of strategy-focused podcast episode. And what I wanted to go into in this episode is talking about our what we call your impact blueprint at the Humanitarian Changemakers Network and our School of Social Impact, which has now been launched. I don't think we had launched the School of Social Impact in the last cast episodes that we did. So we've launched our online learning platform and community, the School of Social Impact. And now we have been running online workshops and lots of cool things happening there. So I wanted to share what we call at the School of Social Impact, your impact blueprint. And this is the map that guides you as an individual in your change-making journey. And it begins with a vision. And I'm going to go into these steps in a little bit more detail, but I'll just give you an overview of what your impact blueprint is. It begins with your vision. And we always begin with our vision in mind as change makers, because change making is this long, likely ongoing, lifelong journey. So we begin with our vision in mind because our vision is the destination that we're heading towards, or the future that we are working to create in the work that we do as a change maker. And this is important because if we start instead from the perspective of the challenges that we're wanting to address in the work that we do or in our community, then we're always going to be problem solving rather than creating change. So we're always going to be reactive rather than being proactive. And this is important because if we use this analogy of change making being a journey, responding to challenges is like being on a road trip without a clear map or a clear destination in mind. And instead, we're just driving until we hit a challenge or a roadblock. And we're trying to figure out and fix this roadblock. And then we move on until we get to the next roadblock. And that's not a very efficient or effective way to create change. What we want to be doing is we want to be beginning with that big picture vision that we have for the future and then heading towards that vision in the work that we do. And as we're working towards that vision, we will notice that there are problems and challenges that arise throughout, or things that are preventing us from achieving the vision that we want to have, or the impact that we want to have. But we can't just address problems without having that clear vision, because the vision that we have for the future is what gives context and makes those things problems. They're only a problem insofar as they are preventing us from achieving the vision that we have for the future. So the problems or the challenges themselves, we might intuitively know that these things are not good things because there are people in our communities that are suffering, or people are not flourishing and thriving in the way that we want our communities to. But without that bigger picture vision as to what the world could, or what we think the world should look like, there's no kind of context as to why these things are problems. And we need that if we're going to address them. So that's the first stage of our impact blueprint, is getting clear on our vision. Then we have our theory of change. And our theory of change is like the map that we have that we're using to navigate the entire context or terrain that we are navigating on our change-making journey. We use a tool that I developed in my doctoral research called the Theory of Change Canvas. And the Theory of Change Canvas is made up of a few core components, or what we call a working theory of change. It's like the basic elements or aspects of the map that you need to have in place before you kick off on your journey. The other parts of the Theory of Change Canvas are what we call the iterative components, and these are the components that you work on throughout. So your theory of change is both the actual map that you have, it's a product or a thing, but it's also the ongoing process of mapping. And this is really important because things are going to change throughout the entirety of our journey, a specific intervention or a project that we're working on. As our knowledge is changing and evolving, and the situation of the context around us is changing and evolving, and we're learning more about the people that we are wanting to serve or work with, or our actual intervention is then having some kind of causal effect on the context, and that is changing things, we need to make sure that our map is changing to accurately reflect those. And the analogy that I always use is, you wouldn't try to navigate the streets of Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne with a 20-year-old Refidex, those big street directory books that, if you're as old as me, you would probably remember. If you're a bit younger than me, maybe not. But our parents didn't have GPSs, and so they would have a street directory. It was basically like a book of maps, and you would need to look up in the glossary or the index the specific street that you were going to in the suburb. You'd go to that page and you would look on a map and figure out how to get there that way. That's how we used to do things. Now, it would be completely unreasonable to try and navigate the streets using something like that is 20 years old, when we can just use a map on our phone, a GPS on our phone that is regularly updated. That's what our theory of change needs to be. It needs to be the most up-to-date map of the entire context of change that we are navigating on our journey. We can then think of the next stage of our impact blueprint as being our strategy. Now, if our theory of change is like the map or the context that we are navigating, then our strategy is like having a look at that map and saying, okay, this is where we currently are. This is our vision or the destination that we want to get to. This is the way that we are going to get there. This is the specific solution that we're going to take. This is the specific approach. These are the people that we're going to engage and the stakeholders that we're going to work with to get towards that vision, to work towards that vision. And having the theory of change done first is really important, because we want to be able to have adaptive strategies in the work that we're doing. We don't just want to have a strategy set out for us at the beginning of an intervention and then that's it. We follow that to a T. And we don't take time, we don't iterate, we don't look at it, we don't try and improve things along the way. We're just sticking to that the whole time. Now, that's not something that I see very often in the world of campaigning, for example. Campaigning tends to be a little bit more adaptive because you are working in like a more dynamic context of change. So when I say campaigning, I'm talking like big activism campaigns that are campaigning for legislative or policy change, things like that. They tend to be pretty good in terms of how adaptive the strategies and the approaches that are taken are. But it's more so in the development space or in maybe the kind of community sector where we're getting funding for a particular project or an intervention, and we're really taking a programmatic approach to change, where we're saying, okay, this is the particular program that we've been funded to execute. This is the resources that we have. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And there's not a lot of room for being able to adapt. And that's not good, because at the end of the day, there is potential impact that we could have that we're not able to have. And we might think that we're doing this because we only have scarce resources, but when we're able to be more adaptive, we're actually able to use those resources more effectively and allocate them to the things or in the ways that we believe is going to be most effective. And that might be different at the middle of an intervention than what we thought at the beginning of an intervention. So that's why it's so important to be able to have an adaptive strategy, and having a dynamic theory of change, so a theory of change or a map of the context that we're constantly updating, is the thing that allows us to have an adaptive strategy. If you're working on a project and suddenly there's a particular proposed legislative change in your local community that might affect people that you're working with, the beneficiaries of your intervention, how can you look at that and say, is this going to affect our intervention? Should we be adapting our strategy or whatever? At that point, you're getting ahead of yourself. What you would say is you would essentially say, okay, based on our theory of change and this analysis that we've done of the entire context of change that we're working in, how does this proposed policy change affect things? Does this directly affect the problem that we're addressing? Will this change how our particular solution might impact the people that we're working with? Does this new thing, is it going to affect specific activities that we're undertaking? Will we be able to undertake the same activities? And so you do that kind of analysis and you look at it in the context of your theory of change, and then you'll have your answer. You'll be able to say, actually, unless this legislation actually passes, it's not really going to affect us. And even if it does, we've found that it's only really going to affect the symptoms of the problem. And if we address the problem in the way that we are currently addressing it, this legislation probably won't have that big of an impact. If anything, it might actually improve the situation. And you can look at that and you can say, great, now my map has been updated. It's like when Google, the satellite maps update. We've got this new updated map of the context that we're working in. And now I don't have to change my strategy, because the strategy, the route, the path that I'm taking still fits in pretty well with this map that we've got. So that's why it's so important to have a dynamic theory of change and an adaptive strategy. Finally, the final stage of our impact blueprint is what we call our critical path. So if our strategy is essentially the path that we are taking, then our critical path is like when we're in the car and the GPS is giving us those directions and it's saying, okay, in 200 meters, take the second exit on the roundabout, all right? That's your critical path. It's telling you what the next steps you need to take are in order to execute your strategy.
I strongly believe that experiencing the world is one of the most important things we can do as change makers. And I love using Get Your Guide to get the most out of my travel experiences. I recently used Get Your Guide to book a scenic flight over the Great Barrier Reef with my grandma. Seeing the reef was the final thing on her bucket list, and since she can't swim, this was the perfect way to experience this world wonder and a memory that I'll cherish forever. Get Your Guide helps travelers discover the best things to do, with niche offerings you won't find anywhere else. To book your next experience, head to the link in the episode description.
So that's where, if our strategy is like a high-level plan as to how we're going to create the change based on what we've identified in our theory of change or our map of the context, then the critical path is essentially laying out specific steps that we need to be taking in order to do that. And that's where we get really tangible in terms of the specific tasks, which tasks should we be prioritizing, which tasks do we have the resources for, do we need additional support in order to execute some of these activities. That's the real nitty-gritty operational side of it. Now, as an impact strategist, that's not really where my level of expertise is. I don't really work with clients and organizations in the execution of their strategy. I specialize more so in the theory of change stuff. And that's what we teach at the School of Social Impact. We're really focused on teaching our community of change makers those kind of foundational skills. So how do we get our vision, turn it into a theory of change, and then create an adaptive strategy? The critical path stuff, we do pretty well in terms of small projects, personal development. But at an organizational level, I don't really deal with that kind of stuff. If you are working in a large organization, having that theory of change and that strategy is going to make all of that stuff a lot easier. So how do you, as a change maker in the year 2025, or whenever you might be listening to this, craft your own impact blueprint? You've got the steps, right? We have a ton of free resources and tools at the School of Social Impact. In fact, I have put together 3 completely free bundles, depending on what your area of interest or focus is. And what we're doing at the moment is we're actually about a week into our 30-day change-making challenge. And the 30-day change-making challenge essentially walks you through each of these 3 free foundational training bundles. It gives you specific steps and ways of actually working through those, and gives you what order to go through them in order for the 3 to flow really nicely. And you get access to a bunch of additional resources and tools. So this is our first paid program in the School of Social Impact. At the time of recording, it is 27 Australian dollars. So it's not expensive. It's less than $1 a day. But if you want all of the foundational stuff, you can get it in the 3 free training bundles. So we've started our 30-day change-making challenge with our Aligned Agents of Change bundle. And this bundle is really about you as an agent of change, getting super clear on what your journey ahead is going to look like and how you can balance a fulfilling life and meaningful work or impact as a change maker. So if we're thinking about change making being this journey, think of the Aligned Agents of Change toolkit as your way of prepping for the journey ahead. You're getting in touch with your inner compass, the thing that's going to help you navigate along your change making journey. You're also equipping yourself with a really important self-assessment tool. Probably my favorite tool that I developed in my doctoral research. Maybe that's a lie. I think the theory of change canvas is actually going to change the way theory of change is done in the social change space in general. But at a personal level, in terms of your self-development, the Transformative Power self-assessment tool, I've been getting a lot of great feedback on that one. So I also love that one. And that's a great tool for helping you see what you should prioritize next. So I mentioned that the final stage of your impact blueprint is your critical path. And at an organizational level, I don't help organizations determine or dictate how they carry out those activities. That's more of an operational thing in terms of the funding you have, the resources you have, the people that you have on your team. That should all come into consideration when you're actually executing your strategy. But at a personal level, the Transformative Power self-assessment tool that we have in that Aligned Agents of Change bundle is able to help you figure out what you should be focusing on first. And I love to use this analogy of being on your change-making journey and having a flat tire, right? You're on this journey as a road trip, and imagine you have a flat tire. Do you think it would be best for the impact that you want to have and just the kind of general well-being of you on this journey if you focused really hard on putting more and more effort and work onto those 3 really good tires that you have? Or do you think you should take some time, stop, and fix that flat tire? Obviously, we think that we should fix the flat tire. And it's the same when it comes to the weaknesses or the things that you're struggling with the most in an intervention. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And so you need to get clear on that and use that as a leverage point to then gain momentum in all the other areas. That is our Aligned Agents of Change bundle. We also have an ebook that goes into the different types of work, which I've spoken about on the podcast before, so I won't go into, but another great tool. Then we go into the beginner changemaking essentials bundle. Our most popular bundle by far. I think the last time I checked, there had been like 10,000 downloads of this. So it's a very popular tool. This is the same framework that I began the Humanitarian Changemakers Network with, teaching in primary and secondary schools around Brisbane. It's this framework behind me. If you are watching the video, it's our Social Change 101 framework. And it teaches a really simple way for thinking about social change and translating our vision that we have for the future into tangible changes that we might like to work towards, and getting clear on what that destination part of our impact blueprint actually is. So we will be moving in a couple of days in our 30-day change-making challenge onto the Social Change 101 framework. So we have our video training, we have the worksheet to conduct this analysis, and we have the Changemaker new handbook, which basically teaches the framework, but in a very practical and accessible way, because I go through my own personal journey to becoming the changemaker that I was when I started the Humanitarian Changemakers Network, and looking at those 4 different types of social change and how individuals at the grassroots level might work to bring about those types of change. Then we will be moving into systems thinking, and this is a really important set of skills and tools for your change-making toolkit in terms of creating a really comprehensive theory of change. The best kind of map of the context that you're working in is going to be one that is influenced or informed largely by systems thinking. Systems thinking is a way of thinking about things holistically and moving beyond just looking at the different parts of a system, but actually looking at the causal relationships and understanding causality in a non-linear way. Most of the problems and the challenges that you will be dealing with as a change maker are going to be complex challenges. And systems thinking as a way of thinking about the world, as a set of models and tools, and as a framework, is a way of dealing with complexity. So that will be the final third of our 30-day change-making challenge. And we'll be going through a few really key systems thinking tools to help you really develop a comprehensive theory of change. Sprinkled within that 30 days is access to a replay of our Impact Blueprint workshop, which is where I break down this Impact Blueprint in a little bit more detail. I show you the specific worksheets and frameworks that we use to guide us through each of these stages. And it will also allow you to download the Theory of Change canvas and begin to start your working theory of change. I will, of course, leave a link to all of that in the episode show notes, and I will even leave a cheeky discount code for you to get 50% off our 30-day change-making challenge. That is a steal for all of our foundational resources and tools, plus additional bonuses and the guidance and support that I give in your inbox every day for the 30 days of the challenge. So I hope that gives you a good overview of what constitutes your Impact Blueprint as a grassroots change maker. If you are somebody who holds a leadership position in a larger organization and you would like to learn a little bit more about what this looks like at the organizational level, I can help with anything from visioning to theory of change to impact strategy. I don't deal with the execution of that, like I've mentioned, but I will also leave a link in the episode show notes to have a look at the services we offer in terms of consulting and working with large organizations. That really allows us to keep the School of Social Impact going and supporting people who are working at that grassroots level. So I hope you are all looking forward to kicking off your 2025 and having a year of massive impact and serving the communities that you serve and showing up in a way that really aligns with your personal values and passions and mission for the world and has the impact that your communities really need from you.